Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people's story. This whole mess started about 6 months ago when a developer bought the empty lot next to my house and built what I can only describe as a McMansion. Now, some context. I've lived in my modest 1960s ranch-style home for over 20 years. It's not fancy, but it's paid off and it's mine. The empty lot next door had been vacant forever, mostly because it was oddly shaped and had some drainage issues. The previous owners couldn't figure out how to build on it without spending a fortune on foundation work. But I guess money wasn't an issue for the developer who bought it, because they somehow got permits to build this massive 3-story monstrosity that literally towers over my single-story home. I wasn't thrilled about having such a huge house next door, but I figured I could live with it. That was until the new owners moved in. From day one, they made it clear they thought my little ranch house was beneath them and ruining their property values. The first interaction I had with them was when the wife came storming over while I was working in my garden. "Excuse me," she said in that tone that immediately tells you someone isn't actually being polite. "We need to discuss your house." I stood up, brushing dirt off my knees. "What about my house?" "Well," she said, looking at my home like it personally offended her, "it's much too close to our property line. It's affecting our views and our property value. We'd like you to do something about it." I actually laughed, thinking she was joking. "My house has been here since 1964. It's not going anywhere." Her face turned red. "This is serious. Your house is literally right next to ours. We paid over $1 million for our home, and we shouldn't have to look at this." She gestured dismissively at my house. "Look," I said, trying to stay calm, "my house meets all setback requirements and has for nearly 60 years. If you had concerns about the proximity, you should have thought about that before buying your lot." "Well, we didn't expect it to be quite so close," she huffed. "Surely you can understand our position. We're willing to contribute to having your house moved back." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Move my house? Lady, that's not happening. This conversation is over." She stormed off, but that was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, they filed multiple complaints with the city about my property. They claimed my house violated setback requirements. It doesn't. They complained about my garden, fully within code. They even tried to claim my mature oak tree was dangerous and needed to be removed. It's healthy and permitted. Each time, city inspectors would come out, check things over, and confirm I was in compliance. But the neighbors wouldn't let up. They started taking photos of my property daily, documenting what they claimed were violations. They called code enforcement so many times that the officers knew me by name. Then they escalated things. They hired a contractor to install bright security lights aimed directly at my house. Every night, my bedroom was lit up like a stadium. When I asked them to adjust the lights, they claimed they were necessary for security because my house was suspiciously close to theirs. I'd had enough. I contacted a lawyer who specialized in property disputes. After reviewing my situation, he confirmed what I already knew. I was completely within my rights, and the neighbors were basically harassing me. "They're counting on you getting frustrated and giving in," my lawyer said. "People like this often think they can bully their way to what they want, but we can fight back." He helped me draft a cease and desist letter regarding their harassment. We included copies of all city inspections proving my property was in compliance, and demanded they stop their frivolous complaints and remove the security lights that were clearly designed to harass me. Their response? They sued me. Actually sued me, claiming my house's proximity to their property line was causing them emotional distress and loss of enjoyment of their property. They demanded that I either move my house or pay them $200,000 in damages. I almost had a heart attack when I got served with the lawsuit papers. But my lawyer just smiled when I showed him. "This is actually perfect," he said. "They've just opened themselves up to a countersuit for harassment and abuse of process. Plus, their case has zero merit. Your house predates their purchase by decades and meets all codes. They're going to regret this." He was right. The judge took one look at their lawsuit and almost laughed it out of court. But before dismissing it, he let my lawyer present our countersuit. We had documented everything. Every frivolous complaint, every harassment incident, photos of their security lights, everything. We also had testimonies from city inspectors about the multiple unfounded complaints. The neighbors tried to argue that they hadn't known how close my house was when they bought their property. The judge wasn't having it. "Did you not look at the lot before purchasing?" he asked them. "Did you not review the property lines? Your failure to do due diligence does not constitute an emergency on your neighbor's part." When their lawyer tried to argue about property values, the judge cut him off. Your clients built a massive home on a lot they knew bordered an existing property. They cannot now claim surprise or hardship because that existing home is existing. This lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. But it got better. The judge then turned to our countersuit. He ruled entirely in my favor, ordering them to pay my legal fees around $15,000, remove all security lights aimed at my property, pay damages for harassment, $25,000, stop filing frivolous complaints with the city. The look on their faces when the judge read his ruling was priceless. But the best part, he added a specific injunction preventing them from filing any future complaints about my house's location or proximity to their property line. If you violate this injunction, the judge warned them, you will be held in contempt of court. Your neighbors have a right to quiet enjoyment of their property just as you do. Perhaps next time you'll consider the existing neighborhood before making such an expensive purchase. They appealed, of course, lost that too. By the time it was all over, they'd spent close to $100,000 in legal fees, paid me $40,000 in damages and fees, and were still stuck living next to my too-close house. But they weren't done being petty. After losing the appeal, they decided to try a new tactic. They started construction on a privacy wall right along the property line. It was clearly meant to block their view of my house, and, coincidentally, block most of my natural light. What they didn't count on was me knowing the local building codes better than they did. Turns out, in our city, any structure over 6 feet tall needs special permits and can't be built right on the property line. Their planned 12-foot wall? Definitely not permitted. I waited until they'd spent quite a bit of money on materials and initial construction, then made a single call to the building inspector. Work was halted immediately, and they were forced to tear down what they'd already built. Another $20,000 down the drain for them. They tried to argue that they needed the wall for privacy since my house was so close. The building inspector just shook his head and pointed out that if privacy was such a concern, maybe they shouldn't have built a 3-story house overlooking their neighbors. After that, they finally seemed to run out of steam and money. These days, they mostly just pretend my house doesn't exist. They installed some very expensive landscaping to try to block their view of my property, which is fine by me. It actually looks quite nice from my side. I used part of the settlement money to install some lovely thermal blinds on my windows, much better than fighting with security lights, and put the rest towards some home improvements I'd been wanting to do. My little ranch house might not be $1 million mansion, but it's mine, it's paid for, and it's staying right where it's been for the last 60 years. The whole experience taught me something important. Sometimes the best revenge is simply standing your ground and letting entitled people crash against it like waves on a rock. They spent well over $150,000 trying to force me to move my house, only to end up exactly where they started, living next door to my too-close house. I have to admit, there's a certain satisfaction in sitting on my patio, enjoying my garden, and knowing that every time they look out their fancy windows, they have to see my little ranch house exactly where it's always been. Sometimes the best revenge is simply existing where entitled people don't want you to be. Those security lights they installed? They're now illuminating their expensive landscaping instead of my bedroom. The property line they were so concerned about? Still exactly where it's been since 1964. And my house? Still too close for their comfort, but too bad. I was here first. Just last week, I saw a for sale sign go up in front of their house. Guess they finally realized they couldn't bully or sue their way into changing reality. I almost feel sorry for them. Almost. But mostly I'm looking forward to hopefully getting some new neighbors who did their due diligence before buying the property. Edit. Wow, this blew up. Thanks for all the supportive comments. To answer some common questions. 1. Yes, my house really has been here since 1964. I have the original deed and building permits. 2. No, moving a house isn't as simple as they seem to think. It would have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and likely damaged the structure. 3. Yes, I still have all the documentation and court records in case the next owners try anything similar. 4. The tree they complained about is still standing and healthy. Edit 2. Several people asked about the property values in my area. Yes, the neighborhood has gotten quite expensive, but that doesn't give new residents the right to try to force out existing homeowners. My house might not be worth $1 million, but it's my home. Update. It's been about 3 months since my last post, and wow, do I have updates for you all. First off, thank you for all the supportive comments and messages. Several people asked me to update when the house sold, so here we go. Remember that for sale sign I mentioned? Well, it stayed up for quite a while. Turns out when you're trying to sell $1 million house, it helps if you disclose that you lost a lawsuit about the neighbor's house being too close. Who knew? The entitled neighbors tried everything to make their house more appealing. They even hired a real estate stager who suggested they focus on marketing the other side of the house. You know, the side that doesn't face my apparently offensive ranch home. But the best part? Every potential buyer who came to view the house would inevitably wander over to my yard to ask about the situation. I guess seeing security lights pointed at an empty garden and expensive landscaping blocking one entire side of the property raised some red flags. I was working in my garage one Saturday when a couple approached me. They looked like typical upscale home buyers, the kind my previous neighbors had probably hoped would buy their house. "Excuse me," the woman said. "We're looking at the house next door and wondered if we could ask you a few questions." I braced myself for more complaints about my house being too close, but instead, she said something that totally caught me off guard. "We heard there was some kind of lawsuit about property lines. We'd like to hear your side of the story before making any decisions." So I told them everything, showed them the documentation, the court orders, everything. Instead of being put off, they actually laughed. "So they tried to make you move a house that's been here since 1964? The husband asked, shaking his head. "That's insane. But at least we know you're a neighbor who stands up for their rights." Turns out they were both lawyers themselves, one in real estate law, ironically enough. They ended up buying the house for way below asking price, largely because my previous neighbors had to disclose the lawsuit and the resulting restrictions about property line complaints. The best part? When they moved in, they immediately had those ridiculous security lights removed. They even asked for my input about the landscaping, saying they'd prefer a more natural border between our properties. "We actually like the character of having different styles of homes," the wife told me. "It's what makes a neighborhood interesting." They've been here about a month now, and what a difference. They invited me over for a housewarming BBQ, something my previous neighbors would never have done, and we've already established a much better relationship than I ever had with the entitled couple. Oh, and remember that healthy oak tree the previous owners tried to have removed? My new neighbors actually thanked me for protecting it, saying the shade it provides helps keep their cooling costs down. But here's the real karma. I found out through neighborhood gossip that my previous neighbors took a massive loss on the house sale. Between their legal fees, the landscaping costs, and selling under asking price, they lost almost $400,000 on their dream home. Apparently, they've moved to a gated community where all the houses look exactly the same. Good riddance. My new neighbors did make some changes to their house, but all positive ones. They removed the excessive outdoor lighting that was clearly meant to annoy me. They replaced the half-built privacy wall with some lovely native plants that provide natural screening without being aggressive about it. They even repainted their house a color that complements the neighborhood instead of trying to stand out like a sore thumb. Last weekend, they hosted a neighborhood get-together in their backyard. As I sat there chatting with other neighbors, someone mentioned how the previous owners had tried to force me to move my house. "Can you imagine being that entitled?" my new neighbor asked, gesturing with her wine glass. "The house has been here for 60 years, and they thought they could just bully it away?" As a real estate lawyer, that lawsuit made me cringe. I learned that during the house sale negotiations, my previous neighbors had tried to require the new owners to continue the fight against my too-close house. The new owners not only refused, but used it to negotiate an even lower price. They actually had that written into the initial contract, my neighbor told me, laughing. My husband and I couldn't believe it. We had our lawyer add specific language stating we would not pursue any claims about the property line or house location. I also discovered why the house had taken so long to sell. Apparently, 3 other potential buyers had backed out after learning about the lawsuit and restrictions. One had even called it a legal nightmare property because of all the documentation about property line disputes. The entitled neighbors had tried to paint me as the difficult one, but potential buyers saw through that pretty quickly. As one of my new neighbors said, "Anyone who sues to move a house that's been standing since 1964 is clearly the problem, so here we are. My little ranch house is still too close. But now it's next door to people who actually appreciate good neighbors more than perfect property lines. My garden is thriving, my oak tree is healthy, and I've got great new neighbors who respect boundaries, both legal and physical." The moral of this story? Sometimes you just have to stand your ground and wait for karma to do its thing. And maybe, if you're lucky, entitled neighbors will eventually price themselves right out of your life. Final edit. Thanks again for all the support. A few final updates. 1. My new neighbors are amazing. They actually asked for my old photos of the neighborhood to learn more about its history. 2. We're planning to have regular neighborhood gatherings, alternating between their fancy new patio and my classic backyard. 3. The property values in our area have actually gone up since they moved in. Turns out good neighbors are worth more than perfect property lines. 4. I'm using the last of my settlement money to repaint my house. The same color it's always been, just fresher. My new neighbors offered to help. Sometimes happy endings just take a little time and a lot of standing your ground. Here's to good neighbors and houses that stay right where they belong. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Gazumping occurs when an agent or seller accepts an offer you make to buy a property at an agreed price, but the property is sold to someone else. This usually happens when the vendor sells the property for a higher amount. This happened 15 years ago, and it is one of the proudest moments of my life. My best friend and her husband have 5 kids together. They lived in an expensive city and rented an old 4-bedroom house for $400 per week. The house was very run down with a disgusting kitchen and stink drains, but it was all they could afford at the time. Still, they made it work. The owner was a nice old lady who was extremely wealthy and very fond of my friend. She froze the rent for 5 years and promised to let them buy the house once they had saved enough to get a loan from the bank. As she had helped other people in a similar way, they knew they could trust her, and so they saved every cent they could. It took them 5 years, but they finally told her they were ready. 2 days later, the nice old lady passed away, before anything was put in writing. Enter the new owners, the lady's 4 children, each extremely wealthy in their own right. They inherited a huge portfolio of properties. When they first spoke to my friends, they assured them that the sale would still go through, but they would have to wait until probate had settled. Confident, my friends started making some changes to the place. They started by stripping wallpaper, painting, and making plans. Finally, probate was settled and the owners agreed to go ahead with the sale for the previously agreed price. My friends applied for the loan, but to their shock, it was refused. The owners had raised the asking price by $80,000 without telling my friends. To make things even worse, the house would be put on the open market. In 7 days, there would be an open house, and with the market the way it would probably sell immediately. My friends were devastated. They might be able to borrow enough, but it would take longer than a week to get. To make matters worse, property prices had soared recently and rents had gone up a lot whilst theirs had been frozen. Not only were my friends going to struggle to get the money, if the place was sold to someone else and they were asked for a higher rent or were evicted, it would be nearly impossible to find an affordable place with more than 2 bedrooms. I was scared for my friends, but I was also incandescently angry. Those greedy sods were some of the wealthiest people in the city. They were screwing over a struggling family for less than $20,000 each. They didn't need the money. It is pure greed, and it was obvious that they'd always planned to do this. So while my friends scrambled to come up with the money, I started plotting. I looked up advice on what helps to make a sale. We needed to make the place as undesirable as possible without making my friends look like bad tenants. Uncluttered. We moved all the furniture in from the walls, added some extra furniture and borrowed ornaments, and hung a load of motorcycle memorabilia on the walls. The place felt more smaller. Smell. My friend boiled a head of cabbage on the stove and we sprayed ammonia around the front and back doors because it smells like all the neighborhood cats had been marking their territory. We also poured 24 rotten eggs down the drain to make it smell like sewer gas. Neighborhood, we obtained a moldy old couch and dumped in front yard of the neighbor across the road, with permission of course. Neighborhood X2, we started calling friends for help. Anybody with a loud and crappy car was asked to do a few laps in front of the block during the open day. The street was unusually busy that day. Everyone we knew found a reason to drive by. It was practically rush hour. Neighborhood X3, we called out mates from the rugby club, full contact football without any of that soft padding. A big portion of our club are very large men. The next door neighbor set up a BBQ in their front yard and we offered free food and cheap beer. They came on motorcycles wearing their roughest gear. There was quite a crowd. A lot of people showed up for the open day. Quite a few were in and out within minutes. One lady sat in her car and watched the party next door before driving away. The one bloke who stayed any length time was brave enough to start up a conversation with someone leaving the party. He asked if they were often there and was told every couple of weeks or so they have an after-party morning and the party the night before was 3 doors up. The party-goer also helpfully mentioned the troublesome drains that are always getting blocked by tree roots and stinking up the place. The potential buyer left without making an offer, so my friends were the only ones to make an offer. They still had to pay more than they'd planned, but not as much as the greed bastards wanted. My friends signed the papers and paid the deposit that day, so when the brave buyer put in an offer of $30,000 more than my friends, there was nothing the owners could do about it. Strict anti-gazumping laws. I would have loved to see the owners' faces when they found out. For all the people who are saying they had cheap rent, they didn't. $400 was the rent in 2004, and that was pretty high back then. By the time the lady died, average rent for a house that size had only gone up by about $40. Nowadays, 4-bedroom houses in that area go for approximately $800 per week. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.